So you will have somewhere it says change it into the other two forms. So whatever form I give you, whether it's fraction, decimal, or percentage, you need to give me the other two forms of that. And so I just pulled a couple of them here. The first one it gave you is a fraction. So the easiest thing for a fraction is to make it a decimal first. So if you're making it a decimal, you are literally just dividing. So to change this to a decimal form, which is one of your forms that you obviously need to do, then you are just going to take 3 and divide it by 8, all right? And you get 0.375. 0.375. All right? If I want that as a percentage then, as a percentage, I'm just going to take that decimal and I'm going to move it over 2 places to the right or multiply by 100. It's the same thing. And so I'm just going to do this and I will get 37.5%. I will say for these, I will give you no decimals larger than 3 decimal places, really. You're not going to get like repeating decimals here. And so give me the whole decimal and give me the whole percentage, because the most decimal places you'll likely have is 3. So that you don't have to do any rounding on this particular section. Later on, it will say rounds like the nearest tenth of percent or solve to the nearest tenth. So it'll tell you that in your instructions later on. But for this part, you don't need to worry about any rounding. The next one here gave you a percentage. So when it gives you a percentage, it doesn't matter which one you do first. The easiest one is really the decimal here. If you have a percentage, then to go to decimal form, we just take that percentage and we move the decimal 2 places to the left. So in decimal form, this would be 0.72. For fraction form, you're just going to take that number, whatever it is in percent form, and you're going to put it over 100. And of course, you do want to reduce here. What goes into both 72 and 100? 2 does, right? You'll be able to do it again, but so divide by 2, and you're going to get 72 divided by 2 is 36 over, we can keep reducing it, right? What else can we reduce here? Yeah, 2 again. So we could have done 4 at the beginning, or you can just keep reducing. 36 divided by 2 is over 25, all right? That's as small as we can get that one, so that is my answer there. All of these will have 2 answers. Everything in this section will have 2 answers. So remember, if you want an equation, the percent times the whole equals the part. Or if you want to do a ratio, some of you like that better, you can do the percent over 100 equals the part over the whole. All right, so whichever way you do it is fine, whether you set it up with an equation and solve or whether you set up with ratios and solve. All right, so for this first one, if we do an equation, anytime you see the word what, that's where your variable is going to go. X of always means multiplication. We have the number 133. Is always means equals, and 104. So this is the percent. Of is always what is right in front of whole, and this is the part. So if I set up a ratio there, then I would say percent I don't know, that goes over 100, equals the part, that's 104 over the whole, 133. Either way, you end up dividing 104 by 133. When you divide that out, you're going to get decimal. So this you do have to worry about rounding. If you divide 104 divided by 133, you're going to get 0.78195. It's just going to keep going like that, right? So you do need to multiply that by 100. So you will get 78.195, and it keeps going. This says to round to the nearest tenth, which means I need to look at my 10th place and then look to the number to the right of it. 5 or above makes it go up, 4 and below keeps it. This is a 9. So I'm going to take that 1 and make it a 2. So my answer here is going to be 78.2%. 78.2%. All right. So pay attention to your rounding here, because rounding errors are like a third off, which means if you were to mess up every single rounding, we don't want to do that, right? We're like below a 70 at that point. So pay attention to your rounding here. So look at the next one up here, number 7. 104, that is my part. So 104 equals 94%. When they give you the percent in part of the problem, you need to go ahead and change it to a decimal if you're going to do it as an equation. So instead of 94%, I'm going to write 0.94. Of is multiplication, and what is my variable. So once again, I am going to divide. If you set this up as a ratio, my part is the 104. My whole is what's after the of. I don't know it. That equals my percent, 94 over 100. All right. Either way, when you divide, you're going to end up dividing 104 by 0.94. And again, it says round to the nearest tenth. So when you do this, you get 110.6382. It keeps going. Rounding to the nearest tenth means this is the one I want to round. I'm going to look to the right of it. To the right of it, I have a 3, which is less than 5, which means I'm going to keep this 10th place the same. So my answer here would be 110.6. So these instructions say find each percent change to the nearest tenth of a percent. And then it also says state if it's an increase or decrease. I will say, I'm serious. State if it's an increase or a decrease. If I were you, I would just decide that before I start the problem. I'm going from 36.8 to 50. That's going up, increase. 14 from 54 to 47. That's going down, decrease. Just go ahead and write that out so you know when you write your answer to put it beside that word. Okay? Because the last thing you want to do is forget that. That is, again, an error that I take off for, and that is just a hateful error to have to count off for, because I know that you probably logically knew what the answer was for increase or decrease, okay? So just go ahead and write if it's an increase or a decrease so you don't forget it here. So the rule here is that you subtract the 2, that is your numerator, and your denominator is always the first number. So whatever you have to do to remind yourself of that, the most common mistake here is people divide by the wrong number, okay? So even if you have to underline it, like this is going to be my denominator for this one. This is going to be my denominator for that one. It does not matter how you subtract because it's absolute value, but it does matter what your denominator is here. It's always the first value. So you can subtract in larger to smaller because you're doing absolute value. So like for this one, I could say 50 minus 36.8 is my numerator, but my denominator here is 36.8, okay? And in your calculator, you should be able to do all of that. But if you want to write it out so that you can go back and check your work, so if you want to actually take 50 and subtract the 36.8, you can go ahead and say, okay, that's 13.2 divided by 36.8. And then, you know, you're going to get your 0.3586, whatever. It's going to be this rather long decimal. And it goes on. You do have to multiply that by 100 because you do want it as a percentage. It's asking for percent. So when you multiply by 100, you get the 35.86, and it keeps going. And it says round to the nearest tenth of a percent, which means once again, I'm going to look at that 8. Look to the right of it. It's a 6, which is higher than 5, right? 5 or more, which means this is going to bump up to a 9. So I'm going to say 35.9%. And once again, I am supposed to state if it's an increase or a decrease. This is why I would go ahead and write it out. It went from 36 to 50. That is an increase. Let's look at the next one. Is this an increase or a decrease? This is going to be a decrease. So somewhere I would go ahead and write the word decrease, whether you write it here, and this is where you put your answer, or whether you write it at the bottom. I don't care as long as you write that word. Subtract, it does not matter how you subtract. 54 minus 47. What is my denominator going to be? Always going to be the first one, 54. All right? And so when we do that out, I'm going to get a long decimal, right? I'm going to get this. All right, and so let's see what happens here when we do this one. If I multiply that by 100, I get 12.96, and it keeps going. If I look at this 9, I look to the right of it, I have a 6, which is 5 or more, which means I round this 9 up. What happens when I round that 9 up is that it rounds to technically a 10, which then rounds the other guy, right? So the nearest tenth of a percent is actually 13% here, okay? The nearest tenth of a percent is actually 13%. So it's actually 13%. So I have a 13% decrease would be my final answer here. This guy right here would be my answer. So basically when I look at these, I set up something just like what we just did. I look at a starting value, I look at an ending value, and then I subtract and divide, pretty much is what you're looking for most of these for, okay? I did not put any percent errors or percent differences on this particular one. You'll have some percent errors on your test, but for the quiz, you won't have the percent error or the percent difference, okay? Those last two word problems that we did in the section. You will have these type of word problems though, percent change. So, Samantha bought an item from a store for $80. The next week, the price of the item was $100. By what percent did the price increase after Sam bought the item? So what was the starting price of the item? $80. It was $80. So it went from 80 to what? 100. So now I have something that looks just like those problems before. If I want to find the percent increase, then I am going to subtract the two, 100 minus 80. And I'm going to divide by my starting amount. So what am I going to divide by? 80. So I'm going to get 1/4, which is 0.25. I don't even have to round this, which is going to be 25% increase. When Tim began cleaning a new office, it would take him 2 hours to complete the job. After a few weeks, he was able to reduce the time it took him to clean the office to 1 hour and 42 minutes. What percent of his time was Tim able to save on this job? All right, what was he able to save? Okay, so you'll notice one is in hours and one is in hours and minutes. That's considered two different units. They need to all be in the same units, either hours or minutes. And I would actually recommend doing minutes here just because it's easier. So he started out doing 2 hours. How would I write that as minutes? We'll just multiply by 60, right? It's 120 minutes. So it went from 120 minutes to 1 hour and 42 minutes. That's 60 minutes plus 42 minutes, which is 102 minutes. All right. So I'm just going to do exactly what I've done. 120 minus 102 divided by my starting. What was my starting here?
120.
Yeah, it's going to be 120 as my denominator here. So I have 18 divided by 120, right? Is that what I did? Yes, 18 by 120. So you get 0.15. which is 15%. So this one would be a decrease in time.